This time on Poll Up, it's been nearly 3 years since ChatGPT was released, and a lot has changed since, especially in schools. The main concern at the time in schools was kids cheating, but now, in many classes, it's required. We're going to dig into this with a student and a professor to find out about AI in schools now. Then, youth sports has gotten very professional, but at what expense? Has it taken the fun out of it? And what about the expense in money? We're talking to a parent and a student about that. And then finally, what do you think about driving testing? Do we really need drivers to know how to drive before they get a license? Well, apparently in 1944 in Minnesota, it wasn't required, and an awful lot of people thought, yeah, that's a good idea. We'll talk about that too. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm JD Dapper.
I'm Barbara Carvalho.
I'm Mary Griffith.
I'm AJ Gandino.
I'm Thomas Rogers.
I'm Lee Marinoff.
So 3 years ago, almost, we're a couple months away from the 3-year mark of ChatGPT being kind of unleashed. I was going to say released, but unleashed upon the world. An unsuspecting world outside of maybe Silicon Valley and some research labs. And it has changed a lot of what we do. In education in particular, there has been a lot of concern from the very beginning about what it would mean to education. A lot of the concern at first was, well, kids are just going to cheat. They're just going to have ChatGPT write their papers or whatever it would be. We went to conferences, education conferences early on AI. We're fascinated with the things we were seeing that were being done in other schools and here at Marist to try and address that. But a lot has changed in these 3 years. And now AI, as we mentioned in the open, is required in some courses, and professors and students have really changed, and teachers, when we're talking about schools, have really addressed this in ways that have changed kind of the way we teach. A couple of pieces of data, and then let's dive in. We've got a student, AJ, here at Marist, and we've got a professor. You may have heard of him, Lee Marinoff. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, who's a professor here. So we'll get into this. So Microsoft, which has, and let's be fair, a vested interest in AI, it is one of the big companies that is selling AI products. They did a report in June, a couple months ago, on the state of AI in education, and they looked at both K through 12 and higher ed students, educators, and education leaders. They also looked at it in 5 other countries. So this is a big, big survey they were doing. Students' greatest concern in this survey regarding AI were the potential to be accused of plagiarism, about 33%. And about 30% were, their biggest concern was becoming overly dependent on AI. Now, teachers' greatest concern, an increase in plagiarism and cheating. 23% of higher ed teachers and professors said that. 36% of K through 12 teachers said that. And then the overly dependent was their second biggest concern. 21% of higher ed and 22% of K through 12 teachers were concerned about that. The report also pointed out there were disparities between teachers and education leaders. Teachers in general felt less confident in how AI had been integrated into the classroom. Education leaders, meaning the administration, were more likely to view AI as an essential part of learning. So let me start with the student instead of you, Lee, for a change. AJ, you have been in college. Basically, your time in college has coincided with ChatGPT being available. What has that meant to you? What is your biggest concern about it? Or what's your view on this?
Yeah, it's been interesting to see. I think my first year at Marist was when I first heard about ChatGPT or anything AI related. And I had basically zero understanding of it. And then each year, it's just gotten more prevalent. So like sophomore year, I started noticing a lot of people using it. And then last year, it became such a presence in the classroom and a topic of discussion amongst professors too.
Are any classes you're in, are you required to use it?
Required? No. But I think teachers are trying to find ways to incorporate it more, at least in my major. I think communications would be one of the more, I guess, progressive on that.
So Lee, you're on the other side of this. What have you been doing? What's your concerns? How have you addressed this?
Well, first I wanted to grill AJ a little bit more. So when you said you came in sort of not knowing, and then you incrementally each year become much more a part of things in the class, are you learning how to use it by yourself? Are you learning it in class? Are you learning it from your the guy down the floor where you live, and everybody goes to him because he's really AI. Some fellow students. So I'm just curious, where's this seeping?
I think for my generation and for students like my age, most of us are learning to use it by ourselves because we have such a understanding of the internet and how it works. So like, it's not something that is very complex. You just ask it to do something and then it will do it.
But you do get more sophisticated in how you do prompts and things like that. It's not just...
Yeah, that's true. But that's just sort of like a skill you acquire as you use it more. I don't think it's something that professors or anyone else is teaching.
Did you use AI to help develop the segment?
No.
Okay. Just checking. Okay. So Jay, back to your question. And then I'm going to put it over to Barb, who actually will correct whatever I say, because it's likely, look, everybody knows I'm the Luddite of the team. So I am really going from a long way to get where I am today. And I think, I find it really fascinating and really interesting, but as a resource. And I think to AJ's point, because students are learning it and they're using it and they're going to be doing it, and it's going to affect your lives in society, your job. Like, it's there, and it's only going to become more prominent in learning. And if it is some wonderful resource, which I think it is, and it can be used that way, then I think we are obligated in the classroom to at least provide some, issues about how to use it, what the boundaries might be, what the concerns might be. I've had instances in class where I've been concerned about the so-called cheating aspect. And I remember last semester, I came up with a way where I gave a take-home final, and students could use whatever resource they wanted to. But then when they came into class to write the final, they had to write it without any other information with them. So in a sense, well, that's great. If students are going to study using lots of resources and really think about it because they can't bring those materials in with them, well, I've sort of accomplished my goal, haven't I? Got students really studying for their final and then showing that they can write it. So I get the notion of a reluctance, but my colleagues, you kind of got to get on board because it's there. It's like different than using slides and projectors and audiovisuals in class. I mean, we've moved on. And so I think we have to move on with that. So Barb, fill in all the gaps.
Oh, no, not at all, Lee. Although, looking at this, this data about, a third of people thinking the rest of us will become, overly dependent. I can remember way back in the dark ages when learning math, we weren't allowed to have a calculator.
Good.
As I've said in the past, who on earth would be walking around with a calculator in their pocket?
Yeah.
And we all know how that turned out.
How are you going to learn your times tables if you have a calculator?
So a couple things here. One, Lee, of course, you're being so humble. Lee actually is teaching a course in survey research and data analysis this semester, and he spent his summer vacation pretty much revamping that course so that students would be learning some of the core materials and the readings and kind of part of the class or kind of on their own. And then the class became much more focused on experiential learning and activities and discussions and debate. And I don't think that's a bad thing for education. We have had these tools for education since Socrates and Aristotle. So I think we have always had different tools, and to think of AI as a tool, I think is most appropriate. There was a opinion column in the Times the other day that equated AI with, two other, horrific things that were going to destroy the world: nuclear power and pandemics. And I think that's somewhat exaggerated. And also, are these things powerful? Yes, AI is very powerful. Are things that are powerful, often not used for good? Of course, history is full of those moments in time. But I think that this also provides us an extraordinary moment, not only in society, but especially in education, to be able to learn both core material and to be learning through active learning with teachers and experts and professors, which I always see college is exactly what it's supposed to be.
Yeah. If our goal is critical thought, why does this invade that or detract from that? In fact, you have to be critically thinking about what we're now asking and learning. And we do know, because of the way AI works, I mean, it can be wrong. It's not exactly, you can't exactly spoon it into whatever you're doing.
One thing that, to your point, both of your points about how it can be useful is from that Microsoft survey, the most common purpose that students said for using AI was for brainstorming ideas. And that's how we use it here. I mean, we use it at the poll, and it is great to have somebody else at the table brainstorming. But AJ, I wanted to ask you, there was a Pew poll from April of this year, and it asked the broad public, not just parents, not just students, and not just professors or teachers, what do you think about AI in the classroom? And only 24% of people in America believe that AI would have a positive impact on K through 12 education. Now, I understand you're in college. I'm just curious, something that Lee said, it is our obligation at Marist and at any college or university and any school to prepare students for the future. If AI wasn't part of what we were doing, would you feel like you were cheated? I mean, do you fully believe that AI, whether it's ChatGPT or whatever you want to call it, is going to be a fundamental part of your life and career going forward?
Yes, I think it's inevitable in a way when there is this sort of technology that is so groundbreaking, it's going to find its way into every sector of life. So as much as there might be benefits to avoiding it and trying to prohibit its use, I think that we have to find a way to incorporate it, or else students will do it in a more nefarious way, use it in a more nefarious way.
Yeah. What about the issue of plagiarism and cheating? Because that is, clearly, I think, of all things, that seems to be the number one concern that teachers have, that students are going to suddenly emerge with wonderfully written documents and term papers that would rival Einstein's theory of relativity, perhaps. So, what about...
Or be Einstein's theory of relativity.
What would Einstein say about my topic?
Yeah, I mean, it's completely widespread, I would say, the use of ChatGPT just to complete assignments or to write things for people. And as much as professors do take action to try and stop that plagiarism, there needs to be more systems put in place to prevent it.
Are you finding that professors are doing what Lee's doing, which is more oral exams or more, things that are ways to test your knowledge or to see what you learned that prohibit you from in the moment being able to access LLMs or AI?
No, I haven't had that happen at all.
Right. You haven't taken Lee's class then, I guess, huh? This last semester.
Maybe
or
next
is it this
semester?
semester? Yeah, it's this semester.
I think that the cheating issue, obviously a concern, but I think has been somewhat blown out of proportion. I mean, look, once we had cut and paste on laptops,
Spell check.
I mean, that made it a lot easier to cheat. And I think for those students who are somewhat averse to learning or worried about being judged or looking for, the easy way out, there have always been methods to do that. So I think spending too much time on the idea of cheating and plagiarism, although the plagiarism is another issue with where the content comes from or whether people are being compensated for the content that they have created, I think are different issues. But in the educational setting, I think that, again, if students feel that they have not mastered the material and feel more comfortable in that space, they're paying a lot of money to be at a university. And it is what you get out of it. I think universities and educators overall would be better served to be focusing attention on how to use this to be most productive and to understand how students can learn with it rather than focusing on...
That's a very valid point. And I think I would add to that we're probably in an interim transitional period. So we're getting these concerns. It's a resource. There'll be plagiarism. Where are we going to be in the next 3 years with students who are now versed in how to use it as a resource, and faculty are figured out that it doesn't have to be a vehicle for plagiarism or cheating? Is it then just going to be an accepted resource, an accepted mode to assist in developing thoughts and the like? And I would like to think, yes, that's going to be the case. So I think we're just in a transition period. I think in a few years, this conversation may be related to the past, and that we will be in a very different place.
Let's move now from the classroom to extracurricular activities, specifically the playing field and youth sports. Are parents' attempts to provide their kids with balance actually adding more stress and strain to their families? Well, I certainly have a lot to say about this topic, and there are a lot of dimensions to it, like finances. So, Barb, what does the data tell us about the cost of youth sports?
Well, certainly, according to a 2025 Project Play at Aspen Institute survey, U.S. families, believe it or not, have spent over $1,000 on their child's primary sport, 46% increase since 2019, and nearly $1,500 per child when accounting for other sports. I mean, this actually feels, mind-boggling, remembering playing sports with sticks and balls. I know that was a long time ago, but, the public playground where you could just, bring a ball for, whatever sport you were interested in. Another Project Play survey polled the U.S. and found that 49% of parents said they'd struggle to pay for fees, equipment, uniforms, and believe it or not, travel, because literally these sports are no longer in your backyard. So I think what we're seeing is, and this can go on and on, the number of students playing all sorts of sports, from baseball to soccer to football to track, the list goes on. And so not only are there expenses to participate in many instances, there are expenses for equipment. And Mary, I think you're learning right now about the need to travel actually a distance from home on a regular basis. So tell us a little bit about, your experience. You've got two boys just at that point that absolutely, middle school age and very much into baseball.
It's interesting because I do have a lot to say on this topic and related to finances as well. So in preparation for the segment, I turned to my husband last night and asked him, with all of the fees that we pay for your travel tournaments, because now we're going into some tournaments seasons here, about how much are we spending? Because he handles the sports costs and all of that. And he really put the figure out of about $1,000. So that figure really hit home when reading through the data. But there are so many dimensions. I mean, we're heavily involved in baseball and travel baseball, not going out of state quite yet. But the cost of equipment is crazy in terms of when we go to purchase sports. I'm not going to name any stores that we may or may not go to. But it's not just even the necessary sports equipment that the boys want. It comes down to having, gloves that are like their favorite ball players' gloves. And so we've actually started, saying to them, well, if you want things beyond the basics, you have to save your own money and you have to put out the cash, because it does add up, and it adds up rather quickly. But I want to bring in Tommy to talk about his experiences from not just a student's perspective, but from, forgive me, Tommy, for using this term, but because you're not a kid, but a kid's perspective, when you were playing football. But did you feel that there was perhaps a little bit too much emphasis on sports, perhaps in high school? And was it, a strain for you?
So yeah, I definitely think it was a strain because there's all that pressure because your parents are paying so much for all their equipment and stuff. But saying the $1,000 a year for the parents to pay, I actually think it's much more. My parents must have spent at least $5,000 plus a year. And then you also have the time that they're spending because they got to bring you back and forth. I used to live in New York, and I would do my sports in New Jersey, which is around 50 minutes away. So it's just completely insane for them to do that. I am so blessed to have them as parents because they did so much for me. And another thing, there was one time where we spent over $10,000 to go one place. I went to Oregon my senior year of high school to do a track meet. And it was such a great experience. And I'm so blessed to have parents that did that for me.
Jay, you look so stunned by that figure.
So you went to Oregon to a track meet, and it cost all the travel money and all that other stuff. So that wasn't a school track meet. Is there club sports in high school for track? I guess I don't know what that's like.
So basically, you can qualify for certain meets, and there's some schools that will take you really far places. they usually take you to New Balance Nationals. I wanted to go to Nike Nationals because I always wanted to go to Oregon. It's like such an experience to do. I'd recommend everyone listening to check out the Oregon track because it is really neat.
Well, I mean, we do have a brand new track here at Marist.
Yes.
But you stopped
But-
running track. You were on the track team, and then you stopped
Mhm.
running track here, right?
Yeah.
When you see this and what parents are going through and stuff, and you've talked about your parents in a nice way. It does seem like when I was a kid, I played Little League. I played some sports in school as well. But I don't remember there being travel leagues or any of this other than there was a soccer camp up in Pomfret in Northeast Connecticut. And that was it. That was kind of the only thing I know that anybody did. I guess maybe some kids got tennis lessons or something. But it just seems different. I mean, in your school, when you were in high school or even junior high, did a lot of your friends, were they participating in sports in these ways, in these leagues and traveling and all the equipment?
I would say 100%. Another thing worth noting is like trainers, even but like in the off season, you're paying for that kind of stuff too.
You had a trainer?
Which is also insane. Yeah, I had it for, I think it was 8th grade to sophomore year when I did football. Me and my friend, we would go to a trainer, which was like 50 minutes away. He was also super expensive. So, yeah.
Yeah, my boys have friends who have pitching coaches and hitting coaches that they work with during the winter and the off season.
No, wait. Now, how old's your oldest?
My oldest is 12.
So a 12-year-old friend of your son's has a pitching coach.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. Have we jumped at shark here on what youth sports means? I mean, I think that's
Well,
my
I think
question.
it is a question, and I ask that question often to myself and to some of those around me. But the passion that you hear when Tommy talks about going to Oregon, and it's something he's always wanted to do. And when you hear that passion, and especially from a parent's perspective, you want to do everything that you can to foster that interest and enthusiasm. So it's there's some justification to it. But Tommy, you brought up the amount of time that it takes. It's not just the financial component to it. There's a time commitment here. And according to a USA Today Harris poll, nearly 2/3 of parents say their child's sports team travels more than necessary. And, I have to say that this pertained to not a travel team, but a local softball team where my boys were playing baseball on Mother's Day. And it was like, I lost the battle. I was like, can we please just do something other than go to a baseball game on Mother's Day? And I did lose that battle. So, what do you think, Tommy? Do you think that it is excessive to a certain degree?
I think 100%. A lot of it is baseball that has the excessive time because it's all the travel tournaments and that kind of stuff. My brother, he used to do baseball, and I just remember every single weekend it's just baseball. You're traveling to just random places too that are just in the middle of nowhere.
Well, also, I think what we're finding too in a number of different sports is the economic divide that is really getting wider and wider. I mean, the gap is growing as I think a number of schools do look at sports as something that they can cut to save money, especially when they need to be able to fund things that are core to a curriculum and dollars are short. So we're really seeing this economic divide that is growing over time. In 2023, young people ages 6 to 12 from the lowest income households, those under 25,000, participated in organized team sports at 25%, compared to 39% among peers from households earning $100,000 or more. So when we look at, some of the benefits of team sports, and many of us, you talked about, Little League, which was, in your town, something everybody participated.
My
to
dad and I walked to the baseball field. It was at the elementary school we walked to.
Mhm.
We didn't drive with the bats and bags. I mean, we just walked. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think of them as local teams, and where, you didn't have to be able to drive. You didn't have to be able to go far in order to participate. And some local business donated money so that you could get your uniforms, which were T-shirts, so that, it wasn't free advertising, but it was advertising to all the families that participated. And so the economics, youth sports, I think, was very different.
And the dimension here also is about, at what point does it go beyond healthy competition? And when the athletes are not having fun any longer. I saw a message last night from one of the moms on one of my son's travel team, and they're going to be playing in the fall. And it became this question of, well, the division or the league that they're in, they're playing teams that they were mercied when they played them last time. And for those who don't know what mercied is, it means that basically they're down a significant amount of runs and the game is called at a certain point. And, the mom brought up a really good point. Like, yes, it's all about competition and we want them to improve by playing the sport. But when does it not become fun? If they are playing against teams that they've historically lost to, at what point does it become not so much fun and maybe even demoralizing? So, there's something else here. Like, how much pressure are we putting on our young athletes to perform? And, should they be, just out, like you said, Jay, walking to a local baseball field and picking up a bat and, having a game of pickup at the field or, at the basketball court?
But that's not really
And
a choice
also,
your boys have, right? It is a choice, but it's not a choice that I think would be fulfilling because everybody else in the class is going, on these trips and stuff, right?
And we'll remember also that there are lots of different leagues, and this is something that's new to me. And you may hear me hesitate because I'm still learning a lot of the ropes and some of the terms that are used and how they differ. So, there's a local little league, there's the travel teams, and then, you got kids my boys are constantly outside with wiffle balls and, wiffle ball bats playing in the backyard. So there are different aspects to it. So yeah, there's a lot of, comparison to their friends. Who has a pitching coach, who started the last game, who's going to pitch the next game, what position are they playing? So yeah, I think there is peer pressure. There, I think, can be some pressure from parents. And, Tommy, you're shaking your head. You may have experienced this firsthand playing football.
I totally agree. There's definitely that pressure there. You want to be better than everyone else and do more than everyone else. And if you don't, you almost feel, lesser.
Well, and you played football, so I do want to bring that up. Was that a difficult decision for your parents to allow you to play football? Because I have one son who I think would be an amazing football player. He has the build. He just the other day threw a spiral that I could never possibly imagine he could throw, although I do know he has a very strong arm. And there's a part of me, because I love football. Sunday is football day in the Griffith household. I would love to see him play football, but I'm just too afraid because of the health and safety issues.
Yeah, so I'm right there with you. I think that it's super dangerous and that kind of stuff. But my parents, they loved it. They wanted me to be in it. I think that a lot of parents should veer more towards flag football because you're still getting that same experience. It's not as much contact. And I think that once you get into high school or so, that's when you should start going to real football.
So the fun fact, I think, today is going to be a little bit surprising and maybe, awakening to really. So anyway, this was a survey that was done in 1944, asked just of residents of Minnesota who were 21 years of age and older. And that becomes important in a sec. So bear with me as I give you the question and some of the results. At the present time, no test is required to obtain a driver's license in Minnesota, 1944. Do you believe all drivers should or should not be required to pass a driving test before obtaining a driver's license? Now, this may seem like, really? But there's a history here that's, going to be you will be very entertained by, I think. So at that time, when Minnesota did not require passing a test in order to get a license, 88% of the residents 21 years of age or older said, yes, we want them to do this. We just don't want people, going out on the road with suspect background. 8% said nope, and 4% had no opinion. So although it was overwhelming that 88% said yes, they should, there was a group that said not necessary. And what I found really revealing in this and eye-opening was that in 1944, Minnesota did not require a driver's license in order to pass a driver's test. You didn't have to do any of that. You could just get a driver's test.
So little history on that, Lee. California, which we know as the capital of car culture, was the first to require driver's licenses in 1913. And if you think about it, how many cars were there in 1913 to actually have licensed drivers? But that's another story. And exams in 1927. The last state to require a driver's exam, you could get a license without a driver's exam in South Dakota until 1959. So there's this long window of like 32 years where states slowly got on the bandwagon here. But where did you learn to drive, Lee?
I started driving kind of like on our own property before I was old enough to, get anywhere near roads or tests. But then I took a permit, and then it was a learner's permit. So I passed a test. I became a junior license, which let me ride. I think that was at 17 or maybe 16, but I had to be not off the roads by a half hour after the sunset. So
but who taught you? Did you take classes?
My father taught me, but I took a driver's test with someone who was, spends their life at some risk putting 17-year-olds in the car and say, okay, let's see what you got.
Yeah, one of the scarier jobs you could have, right?
Yeah. But in the history part, which we were talking before the podcast, it was only 1953 that Illinois required that you had to take a test before you get a license. And wow, that's all I gotta say. So all those old movies where people are driving around, those people didn't have tests to get licenses. I don't know. You other folks, jump in on this, and take us out of our surprise.
Barb, how did you learn to drive?
Well, I think at the age where I was thinking about driving, I think the first vehicle I probably drove was a tractor. And so that's kind of how I learned to, start up a motor and change gears and, steer something around other than a horse. So that probably, was my first foray. But yeah, my dad was given the task for each of us to teach us how to drive. And I did the same thing in New York. You had to take your exam to get your permit. You got your permit for a while. Of course, my parents thought I would be, I guess a terror on the roads, or maybe they didn't want me in the way of other terrors on the road. So I actually didn't get my license until I was 17, and they were very tired of driving me places. So I think I just wore them down and wore them out.
You use that as leverage. Let's turn to Mary of New York City fame. Driving being a little different. Nancy, my wife, grew up in New York City, and she didn't learn to drive until she left New York City and entered the Hudson Valley, where it became a necessity. Her parents never had a license, never learned to drive. So that's just different.
I grew up in the outer boroughs, and everything was about getting your permit and driving. I took driver's ed, which was great. My mom taught me. I was up in Pennsylvania with my boys, and I told them, this is where I learned to drive, because we used to vacation there in the summers and the hills, and my mom would teach me. But I think it was really my good friend, who I'm lifelong friends with now, that he taught me how to drive in Queens. But I will say that I did wait until I was 18 to get my license. In fact, it became a necessity because I was commuting to Fordham when I was driving. But I had gotten into a pretty bad accident with some friends when I was 17, 18, and sort of turned me off to driving. But now it seems like that's all I do is drive, whether it's driving to Marist or driving my kids around. So I could say that, I would certainly overcame that and learned to drive in a couple different ways.
You have a part-time job as an Uber driver. I know that at least you make a few bucks coming the other way. How about AJ and Tommy? What's likely?
I had learned how to drive out of school, and I was always very scared to learn how to drive. That's why I didn't learn until around, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago or so. I'm still very scared to drive. Even when I'm driving now, it's just like, I don't know. I'm very worried about it, especially the highway. My mom, she's always been very scared of the highway. She never even took the highway. And then she would drive me very far places, and it would take forever. But I understand that.
Yeah, no, I get that totally. Yeah, that's the...
I do not like driving at all. It took me years to get my license. It took me 3 tries with the test. And now that I have my license, I don't do it very often.
Where'd you learn? Did you go to class or school, or did your parents teach you?
I had a class, but it was I feel like it was kind of relaxed because it was post-COVID driver's ed. So that probably impacted things. And then I feel like once you fail, it's a morale loss. So That
Well, there's no doubt about it. Passing your driver's test, at least where I was growing up, like that was like a big deal. And if you it's sort of like taking the law boards for someone who went to law school, yeah, it's kind of like a real embarrassment if you don't, pass the rite of passage.
So I have a story. I have two things about this that I wanted to ask. One is in my public high school, we had driver's ed and we had to take it. It was mandatory.
You had to take it.
You had to
Yeah.
take it.
So did anybody have it in their school?
I had it in high school, but it's not mandatory.
So it's not in schools anymore, apparently. I've asked students coming through Marist over and over through the years, and they're like, no, we don't have that. So you either have to go pay for it. But the other thing is that even though we learned in the class, my dad was the one who then took me out to practice, and we went out to a giant parking lot at a beach on the Long Island Sound in Connecticut. And I'm driving along, and all of a sudden a radio-controlled plane lands in front of me, and I nearly hit it. I slammed on the brakes. So my first accident was almost with a plane, which would have been really a great story had it actually happened, although it probably would have been an expensive story to tell. But
Yes, Your
that's my
Honor, I'm
driver's ed
now
story.
indicating that this was the case, believe it or not.
But Jay, did your dad slam on the imaginary brake?
Probably, yes. My mom was the driver who was like, let's go 75, let's go 80. My dad was very careful. And I think it was because he was in a very bad accident in California. He grew up there. I was born there in the 1920s. And he was in a very bad accident in the long before the days of airbags and seatbelts and safety glass. And he survived and didn't have I don't think he was injured badly, but it was very traumatic for him. And so he was a very careful driver. So my guess is when that plane landed, his foot went through the floorboard of the passenger side, and I just didn't notice it.
But so that's a bad story. My father's recommendation or thought was, you're never really a good driver until you drive through 3 winters, because you need to have situations that occur where you have to work your way out of them. So that was his advice, and I think that was taken to heart. Well, nonetheless, in those days gone by, you didn't have to do a whole lot of that to get on the road. And I think that was a revelation for all of us when we saw the results of this Minnesota poll and led us into this interesting, I think, topic. Anyway, that wraps it for this edition, this segment, and we'll catch up with you next week.
That'll do it for Poll Hub this week.
Poll Hub is produced by the Marist Poll at Marist University in Poughkeepsie, New York.
Mary Griffith is our executive producer. Casey Schaff is our production supervisor.
the Poll Up team includes Neil Viswanathan, Hunter Petro, and AJ Gambino.
If you enjoy Poll Hub, please consider leaving a review.
Positive reviews help other listeners like you find us.
If you'd like to learn more about polling and survey science, check out the Marist Poll Academy, our free online learning portal.
If you have questions for us, tweet them at us at Marist Poll.
Remember, you can always tell your smart speaker to play Poll Hub.
And with any luck, it'll cooperate.
Finally, wherever you listen to Poll Hub, there is a subscribe button.
Click it, and the latest episode will be ready for you in your podcasting app as soon as it's released.
We'll see you next time.